would like to present now a bit about my past research during my PhD in Colombia and tie it together with more recent research that I've done here in Scotland. So the overall title that I gave today's talk is Large-Scale Renewable Energy Investments in Energy Insecure Regions. Why do communities resist? So I will try to bring in some examples from global north and south and try to find some commonalities and where I'm at now, what I'm trying to do in my upcoming research, and I hope I can discuss in the last bit of today's talk a bit with you guys these ideas. That would be great. All right, so let's start. As I promised, we move first to Colombia, the south of the country, a province called Huila. And there in 2012, I did my first round of field work. You see the valley on the left side of the, do you see the screen one? I don't see it. Yeah. That is the valley in question. It is a subtropical it's tropical dry forest. And at that time, these two people were living there, among many others. That is Don Jaime and Doña Rosa. And in the background, you see the cacao finca that they have been living on and worked with for more than 20 years by that time. It had been their home. But when I met both and took this picture, they were both already considered illegal occupants of that land. The finca was now ownership of the energy company Endesa, now today known as Enel Group. The transnational corporation had received the rights over the land to build a hydroelectric energy project called Quimbo, a large dam, flooding more or less 8,500 hectares. They had to legally buy the plots, of course, in question, but Don Jaime and Doña Rosa were not the legal owners of the land. The landowner had moved to the city long before that point. He had a separate home and separate income, and therefore agreed very soon on a selling price with the energy company. Doña Rosa and Doña Jaime were merely the land manager, so-called mayordomos in Colombian context. So the landowner himself was willing to sell, but the company only considered the couple living there, actually residing and living off the finca, were considered only impacted economically by losing their income. So they were not considered for resettlement or having any access to land following this project development. So understandingly, both chose to resist the eviction. In 2012, when I visited the valley, it was already occupied by the dam resistance movement. Fisherfolk and farm workers who found themselves in similar situations than this couple, decided to resist the eviction, the loss of employment, livelihoods, and the dam realization in total. Their alternative, what they tried to achieve instead, was to form a peasant reserve zone, agroecological peasant reserve zone in this valley, which would further the agricultural production, maybe make it organic, and like this develop the income and the existence structures in place. So already then in 2012, it was kind of clear for the population living there, around 1,500 people in total living in the valley, but many more dependent on the agricultural production chain, that the dam will not have much benefits for them because the agricultural production chain will break down. This is the most fertile area of the whole province of Huila. There was agriculture happening, so merchants So everyone would be affected. And the energy itself could be of use to the province, as at that time they paid one of the highest electricity bills in the nation, and also the grid was characterized by many outages. However, the dam electricity doesn't go into regional grids, it does go into national grids towards the nation's capital, away from the region. Still today, they are paying the highest electricity prices and still face outages on a daily basis. In 2017, when I was there, and that is 2 years after the reservoir was filled, that is the picture now I took there. During 1 week, there were several outages, and one lasted up to 2 days. So, what you see on this picture now is a large trunk, and I'm not sure if you see the scale, but it was a huge tree which marked the entrance of a former hacienda that produced yucca, rice, corn, tobacco, cattle, like meat at that time. And it's just a symbol of the destruction that was brought along by the dam. So in my recently published article in Technology of Detachment by Environmental and Planning C, I talk about a bit the dimension of detachments associated with this infrastructure. And in my most recent book, I discuss the justice dimensions. And I tell you a bit about that right now. So this is my book I just published last week. So I am not now going into the details of what the book is about, because it is, I will host some book launch events upcoming, which will be promoted by the center. So if you're interested, keep updated there. And I hope you might download it and have a read. In any case, to the right, I propose the energy data justice framework. And my key contribution in this book is that I look at the environmental impact assessment itself that was giving way to the realization of the dam, right? So I identified already in this document 3 main shortcomings. One that is blind spots in the making of the environmental data, simplification and analysis and composition of the data, and intentional manipulation of data to serve power interests. And so I put 3 principles of data justice together. I'm not sure if I can. Okay, if this isn't visible. So here I proposed an open vision, open vision and recognition of multiplicity in data collection and composition. Second, that the environmental impact assessment data should serve the environment and its people. And third, that it needs to be made accountable to the people as co-producers of the knowledge and active participants throughout the project. And all these 3 data justice dimensions should feed into 4 dimension of energy justice. So first, any energy project should contribute to the fair distribution of costs and benefits, to affordable energy, accessible especially to those who are already marginalized and may lack the stable access to energy, and while guaranteeing sustainable and reasonable resource use and equity between generations and species. So one might, of course, remark that one can rarely achieve everything at once, and that certain sacrifices will need to be made in any project. But what I say is that the key question should be, who does need to make sacrifices and who is benefiting? Is an energy project actually needed in this certain territory? And if so, what would be the most suitable way to produce energy here and distribute it? What would the people in place choose? This question, I believe, environmental impact assessments need to address. They need to become more than a technical tool of accountability, but a political tool for justice and change. Okay, if you're intrigued, have a read. But I finish with this case for now and move to another part of Colombia and some other technologies. La Guajira is a peninsula of desert-like climate in the far most north of Colombia, directly on the Caribbean coast. Its dry and windy climate is perfect for wind farms and solar parks, of course. And so it has been heavily targeted by investors in recent years. Here we see a news article on a consultation process on the peninsula headlining Colombia's potential renewables boom short circuits on indigenous resistance. Local communities strongly oppose many of the suggested investments, and again, this despite extensive fuel poverty on the island or peninsula. So not many households have an electricity connection, and if they have it, it's very poor. But these communities, as in the Quimo case, have not decided on the form or scale of the technologies that are proposed by the investors. So I quote from the article, Vayu community members say construction threatens trees and wildlife and has damaged grazing areas for hundreds of goats, killing off a top human food source and violating sacred territory where their ancestors are buried. And José Silva, the director of Nación Vayu, says they are projects done behind the backs of the community, and authorities, politicians, and businessmen sit down to negotiate, not the ancestral owners of the land. So also in this case, solar and wind power, people feel left out and marginalized, the voice is not heard, and their needs and aspirations ignored. Now, one might think or say that this is particular to the global south, where regulatory processes might be weaker and corruption higher, which risks the just implementation of renewable energy investments. But similar conflicts we see all over the world. This is a case from Norway. Fusen is situated north of Trondheim and is one of the biggest onshore wind parks in Europe. Also, this investment has caused large-scale conflicts, protests, and legal struggles. Here, this is a CNN news article where it says that even Greta Thunberg has joined the protests. Again, wind farms. So why would someone who is a climate activist, who wants politicians to take actions against climate change, how would they be against renewable energy? Well, Thunberg herself states in the article, indigenous rights, human rights must go hand in hand with climate protection and climate action. That can't happen at the expense of the people. And in this case, it is the Sami people, an already quite marginalized group within the Scandinavian context. Indigenous peoples are asked to give up their lands for the wind industry, mining, and other purposes to save the world from a crisis mainly created by others. So just quickly, Sami people are the only indigenous group recognized on EU scale, and they have been originally living in the northern region of Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia, Sapmi. And again, they bring up the dimension of distribution, not only of rights and benefits, but also, or costs and benefits, but also responsibilities. Who is actually responsible for the crisis? Who should take the burden? And as this infringes more on the territorial rights of the indigenous people, they talk about green colonialization. So just an extension of colonialization and accumulation of land and dispossession that is already brought along by mining activities and tourist activities in the northern region of Scandinavia. So what is the actual problem with wind for the Sami people, right? One might think it's just a huge tower somewhere out there in the mountains, which shouldn't affect anybody. But what they say, Sami are very close to reindeer herding and the tradition and the culture. Reindeer herding is the big part of their customs. And they do that in Fusen. They have reindeer herds going around there all year round. And as mentioned before, there's already mining activities happening. Winter sports are growing in the area. So the territory gets smaller and smaller. Now the reindeers are disturbed by the new wind turbines. They don't like it, they avoid it. So these areas, and we talk about 200 or more turbines, not anymore accessible. The reindeers stay away. So that shrinks the grazing areas, shrinks the herd, right? And the Supreme Court of Norway already gave right to the Sami and their claims in 2021. The turbines are still operating though. And the proponents of the project say, well, there's no scientific proof that it's actually impacting on animal behavior. It's just a turbine. And that sounds very familiar to what I have seen in the dam case in Colombia, that the scientific arguments of the company were more legitimate than the local accounts. For example, when the fisher folk reported a fish death in the river after the dam construction was finalized, and said because of the sediments and the contamination the water brings, the fish are dying, the company relied on studies done previously saying that the dam would benefit the water quality and therefore benefit the fisher folk. So local accounts were devalued as non-scientific and so not taken into consideration. Another example, which I should bring up in that, is a study done by Baker and Westman in Alberta, Canada, in 2018, where they did assessments themselves as environmental experts, and they saw how the company claimed that moose behavior in the area was not affected by oil sand extraction because a study said that domestic sheep in the UK are not disturbed by traffic noise. So this abstruse and far-fetched comparison value more than the local accounts of the Cree in that case, saying, yes, the moose are impacted, they are affected by it. So just because there were no studies directly done in this, there was no proof, and they rather relied on domesticated animals somewhere in the UK than, taking into this consideration. All right. So now we have seen cases in the global north and south, but also talked a lot about indigenous and farmers populations. But of course, the opposition is big and has been growing with the industry of renewable technologies all over the place. And we have just seen with Greta Thunberg that one of the famous representatives of the environmental activists has spoken out. And also other people of other education backgrounds, etc., are more and more opposing it. In Norway, it could be related to the landscape, the heritage, the environments or concerns around wildlife, birds, etc. But then all that begs the question, of course, okay, what would be the alternative? What would people want or actually see as a project that they could support, especially when they live in energy insecure regions and facing electricity shortages? There need to be investments. So in this query, I found inspiration in remote Scotland, particularly on the Outer Hebrides. where many communities have taken ownership and responsibilities over energy projects in recent decades. And a great starting point is a study carried out by my colleagues at the School of Geography and Sustainable Development, Jess Hogan, Charles Warren, and Mike Simpson. Jess Hogan is with us today, who studied how and compared the acceptance of renewable investments in an area based on the community's shares in the project. And they found a clear correlation between the general acceptance of a project and the community ownership scale. So it didn't need to be that they own the project, but having substantial shares within it and seeing the benefits coming to the region, to their direct community. So on the Isle of Lewis, on the Outer Hebrides, I found particular interesting circumstances. First of all, we have a wind farm opposition, because also the Isle of Lewis, as the peninsula La Guajira in Colombia, have perfect conditions for wind farms and wind technology. And so also already here in early 2000s, a investor proposed over 200 wind turbines being constructed. And that is Stornoway, the main city of the island, and those are the main routes. So all along here we have communities, also community-owned lands. And everyone was immediately against it. Nobody wanted those turbines there. And the opposition led first in 2006 to a reduction in the amount of turbines. So the blue dots disappeared from the map. But still, the opposition was strong. So at the end, the whole project was rejected. And while I was there, just a few months ago in June, people were still talking about this project, and they showed into the landscape, pointed out and said, this would have been plastered with turbines. Look at it, everything would have been turbines. And it seemed very scary in their eyes. So then on the left picture, we see a proposed project, or not proposed, not left. Now we're going to the right picture. These are 3 turbines that were actually built on the islands near Stornoway. So up here, I think. And this is also a case Jess Hogan had looked at. This was a community-owned project, so actually supported by the community and funded by a trust. And the generated income, or not income, the generated profits would go into the community itself. So we see that there is not a general hate for wind turbines. It is just the people need to see the benefits for themselves. We have on the Isle of Lewis only one large connector to the main island, the transmitter, which is a subsea cable connecting Isle of Harris and Lewis to the mainland with electricity. And it has a reduced capacity, like it's limited. So far it's covering the main demands on the island, but as soon as you want to charge an electric car on the island, it's not possible because a charging station would overload the system. So it's really on the edge already. And any turbines added to the system overdo the system. So if it gets stormy, some turbines need to switch off. This is then very tricky for the communities who want to generate a bit of profit, to invest maybe in local infrastructure, etc. Because if they have to switch off as soon as profit is generated, because the system doesn't hold it. All right, so there's one paradox I encountered. The next paradox is that Many of these turbines are located on drained peatland. Peatland for net zero needs to be restored. So while the Scottish government is promoting peatland restoration and wind energy and all these things, and all in large scale, they are kind of missing the contradiction that most of the wind farms in Scotland now today are on peatlands, and they further condense the soil, so further drain the peat and emit carbon. So a turbine also needs to be offsetted. So now all the investors coming to the island of Lewis saying, you need to do that, you need to do that, and please come and be happy with those wind farms, also offshore, large offshore projects. And people are invited to consultation meetings all over. Just within 1 week I have been there, I've seen pamphlets for consultation meetings, for WhatsApp groups, for all kinds of things. And the slogan, a 21st century clearance, came up, what people used in that settings. And that refers to the 18th and 19th century highland clearances, of course, where many people were evicted off their lands. So they see this, again, this green colonization put forward by those investments. Also peatland restoration for carbon credits, for example, which is often also promoted by outsiders coming in saying you should not use your land anymore as you did traditionally. So many conflicts, and yeah, very interesting circumstances to study renewable energy projects and what could be alternatives, right? Again, to the question, okay, if we face opposition against renewable energy in energy insecure regions, what needs to be happening? And of course, the Scottish government says, yeah, we need energy infrastructure development, but we don't have the money, and often the trusts don't have the money to actually invest in turbines. So we need private investors, we need private money to fund all that. And the community's response is private money goes for profit, not for the needs of the communities. So when we look at the left picture, those infrastructures the energy generated would go to the mainland. It would be channeled away from the island again. And Lewis is already paying one of the highest energy prices in the UK. So that might not change. And local projects, again, the investment problem. Where do community get the money from? When they get the money, how do they pay back if they can't generate enough throughout the year to actually generate profit and pay back, because infrastructure is too limited? And so I would like to draw now some commonalities. I'm not sure what time was, but so often in those contexts, I see politicians and business people talk about a lack of communication. So they think that people oppose because they have not yet fully understood that these investments are needed for the infrastructure, for the national energy security, for net zero, to tackle climate change. And so feel like they have to give more information meetings and kind of imply that the people are not really getting it, which creates a certain atmosphere in those meetings where people feel like talked down to instead of being listened to. And that doesn't help the whole scenario. Also, another theory is common, not in my backyard, sentiments, that people want all those investments, but just not here. But as we have seen with Jess Hogan's study and also the other cases I mentioned, people want investment, they need energy. It's just not this particular way. And they want to see and feel the benefits themselves, of course. And then it is mostly about energy injustice. So, as mentioned earlier, the distribution of responsibilities, costs and benefits, who pays the price and who gains. Then procedure, who decides about what is needed, about scope and location. and about recognition, whose knowledge, whose voice counts. And again, this is not just fixed by consultation meetings and giving them more information, but yes, they need to actually have answers to these questions, and it needs to be seen that gains are distributed and the voices and aspirations addressed. So, for example, as visible in the upper picture is a case in La Guajira, a community solar power project. These projects address actual needs where they are needed, and this is covered by charity only. It's not profitable. Profit generates this one. This is the largest solar project in Colombia, in Cesar, in El Paso, also done by Energy Group. This is profit fast and therefore supports national political interests and business interests. And it feeds into net zero ideas, right? But where do people fit into this picture, and in fact, other than human species? It is net zero at all costs, I would argue. The crisis is urgent. We need to act now and fast, and there's no time for effective consultation or small impact projects. It needs to be happening now, it needs to serve big money and growth. But is this still a just transition? Could we talk? I doubt we can talk about justice, but I also doubt we can talk about a transition. And with that, I come to my last slide, and where I'm at now. I would like to further look into the Isle of Lewis, into the whole context there. And I identified already some complexities and issues, which I now just put into this structure. But yeah, it's around the transmitter, who gives the infrastructural restrictions and the dependence on the fossil fuel imports from the mainland, then the cost of living crisis. I have not mentioned yet that the people actually started to peat cut again, like cut peat and burn it as an alternative to the more and more expensive energy coming from the mainland. And that, of course, goes against peatland restoration and all this fuel poverty. Then we have community ownership in the middle of a very concentrated land system regime in Scotland, and a green land rush, which people trying to get more and more land to carbon offset. Carbon credits, that is a whole new scheme as well to finance net zero, but we have seen also contradicts in some way renewable energy generation. And in all that, a retreating state who tries to give responsibility either to the private sector or to the communities themselves to figure out how to make public transport feasible, etc. Thank you. I hope